Welcome to the Giddy Carousel of Pop, the podcast that takes an old issue of Britain's brightest pop mag smash hits and has a good nose through its pages with a guest. I'm Simon Galloway, and he's always ready for some satin sheet action. More of which later. It's Gavin Hogg.
Hello. It's true, I am.
Yeah.
Always up for a bit of satin sheet
I know,
action.
you're a classy guy, so what can I say? So before we set the carousel spinning in motion, Gav, who's been supporting the podcast by buying us a coffee, and who have we got to say hello to and stuff like that?
We need to say a big thank you to Doug Grant. He said, have another coffee, gang. I always smile when I see a new episode drop into my listening queue. Keep up the great work.
No pressure on us.
Thank you, Doug. Keep
Thank you.
up being great yourself. Much appreciated. And I also need to say a big hello and a thank you to Joel at Brighter Day Record Shop, who sent us the fantastic Smash Hits board game, which we're yet to play because of lockdown and all that. Just not had a chance. But we will be having a game of that soon. So thank you very much, Joel at Brighter Day. Much appreciated.
It's on the agenda.
Yes, indeed.
And if you want to support us by buying us a coffee, you too can do the same. It's very simple, and it can be just a one-off thing, or you can buy us as many coffees as you like, as often as you like. It's up to you. Just go to ko-fi.com, that's ko-fi.com/giddypoppod, and chuck us a few quid to help keep the carousel spinning.
So, as myself and Si prepare to crank up the carousel once more, rumours fly around the fairground that an important visitor is on their way. We pay no heed to these flights of fancy. Only last year someone told us that Leo Sayer was desperate to come and take a spin on a horse, but he never materialised. Si greases the axles and the crankshafts, while I brush the horses' manes and sweep the floor. In the distance, I think I can faintly hear someone whistling the Incredible String Band's A Very Cellular Song. It can only mean one thing. The rumours were true, and the co-inventor of the carousel is on his way to inspect us. We redouble our efforts and are just mopping up the last dregs of spilt sugary tea, clearing away discarded fag ends and vinegar-soaked pages of the Daily Mirror, when, looming into view, comes the unmistakable figure of our spiritual guru, the boss man, La Grande Fromage, Mr. Mark Ellen. Will we pass the inspection? We'll find out in due course. But first, let us welcome Mr. Ellen on board and, in time-honoured tradition, ask him to select a horse to ride on. Mr. Allen, which horse are you choosing from the grand array you see before you?
Well, I just imagine a carousel and choose a particular mount. Is that the plan?
Any particular standout
Is it?
features?
I mean, there's somebody already on it. I've got to kick off. I mean, is Toya already on one? And I've got to ask her politely.
She's always on it.
She's on it. I don't know. I mean, just the giddiest, gaudiest. One with the longest mane and the most amusing tail. I don't know. Put me on there anyway.
That's
Let's
perfect.
start.
Right, you're going on that one.
Good.
So, Mark, the carousel will start spinning upon the truthful answering of this question. Have you ever been sick in a gumboot?
Oh, no, I haven't. But I regret it now because so many people clearly had. And their mothers had played golf and they knew what colour Tuesday was. So, yeah, to be discussed.
In that case, we're off.
We are indeed. And the carousel has spun us back to the smash hits of the 11th to the 24th of June 1981, when our guest was features editor of the mag. And as ever, if you want to read along with us, you can do just that, thanks to the Like Punk Never Happened and Smash Hits Remembered websites. You'll find links to the scans of this issue in the episode show notes, along with Spotify and YouTube playlists that include pretty much all the songs and artists featured in this issue of The Hits. You'll also find these links on our website, giddypoppod.home.blog, and we'll post them on our Twitter and Facebook feeds as well. Just search for the Giddy Carousel of Pop or at Giddy Pop Pod. So I think, Mark, before we dive into this issue of Smash Hits, I think we need to find out, go back to the beginning and how you first became involved with the magazine.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I was one of the old lags who'd been in the music press. So I'd been at Record Mirror and then The Enemy and then something called New Music News. So I was we were all old lags, same with Dave, had been at Sounds and Ian Birch, I'd been on the road with Bram Tchaikovsky's Battle Axe. I'd done Steel Pulse in Berlin. I'd been, sitting there with Cabaret Voltaire and Gang of Four gigs. And I just suddenly, I think I'd met Nick Logan on a bus to a Clash gig, on a coach. and got on very well with him. And I kind of knew him anyway from Smash Hits, because he was there when I started, from NME rather. And he'd started up Smash Hits and moved off and started The Face by then, actually. And I think mentioned to Dave Hepworth, this guy, why don't you give this guy a go? Give him a try. Because he might, and I think David read my writing and thought it was okay. So I got a call and was asked if I'd like to interview the Flying Lizards, who had a single out called Money at the time. And I did them, and I passed the test, and I did Julian Cope afterwards. And then suddenly I got the call saying, would you like to come and... I don't think I was even interviewed, actually. I think they just offered me a job. And it was unbelievably liberating. Because if you'd been in the NME, and it was all, the Redskins, and it was Rock Against Racism, and it was kind of, that kind of rather dour time of Joy Division and Einstürzende Sender Neubauten, and they had this kind of philosophy that the NME forced groups to kind of conform with. Have you read any Kierkegaard and all that kind of thing? And they were very disapproving of groups that didn't quite fit the mold. And Smash Hits was completely the opposite. They were just interested in everybody. And part of the advantage was that we were all quite old. I was 26, I think, when I wrote my first thing. Dave was a tiny bit older, and Ian was a little bit older, and Neil Tennant was a year younger than me. We were all kind of too old to be doing it. And none of that music was really aimed at us. It was all aimed at the kind of teenage market. So there were things that you liked. I mean, I loved ABC, and I loved Human League and various others. But a lot of the time, Toyah and, Hazel O'Connor, Hazel Dean, they were not aimed at us. And so the joy was that you just had to find something interesting to write about, to find some kind of form of entertainment in any of those people. And that's how I started, really. I think it must have been about around the time of this issue, 1981. And there it was in Carnaby Street. And I was looking down from the window into the NME offices and seeing all my old pals still there, manning the barricades, off to their Rock Against Racism shows and off to review the Redskins, and thought, thank God I've escaped all that. This is just heaven. This is so much fun. So that's broadly it. That's how I got in there, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned a few people who you were working with back then. What do you remember, of those characters in the office, and what was that office dynamic like?
Oh, the office was fantastic. I mean, it's really kind of so old-fashioned. It had a switchboard with a girl called Sam Archer who ran it, and you had to take little plugs with jack plugs out of the wall and connect them to different sockets to be able to put the PR from Warner Brothers through to the bits desk or whatever. I mean, it was extraordinary. It was all Electrosets and projectors and people projecting slides onto layouts and tracing it all in, and really, spray mount and all that kind of analog world of printing, which is amazing when you think about it now. You walked around with loads of old transparencies stuck to your shoes, stuck on with spray mount, But that was great. There was Dave. There was Ian Birch, who'd arrived from Melody Maker and also New Music News. Again, thrilled to be kind of working on this kind of daft kind of, just throwaway pop music rather than the kind of the intensity of being at the AMM. There was a girl called Boppin' Bev Hillier, who was fantastic, who did the lyrics and whose main job was to sit there checking that the right number of oogies were in the lyrics to Boogie, Oogie, Oogie, or whatever it was. Very important job. You paid 500 quid for the lyrics from the publishers, and if they weren't right, the readers were incredibly upset about it. Quite right. They had to be absolutely spot on. There was a lovely guy. There was Sam Archer, as I mentioned before, who I think we kind of, she looked like a kind of a girl from a 60s a TV show with a kind of fabulous 60s bouffant haircut. There was Rod Sopp, the ad man, who was sensational. We used to go to lunch with Rod in the cafe, and he always had the same guy. He was just a real banter merchant. It was so funny. He went on to be the guy who did the face and various things afterwards, And his main thing was rare steak. He always wanted a rare steak. So they'd say to him in the restaurant, how do you want your steak? And he'd say, just break its horns off, wipe its arse, and slap it on the plate. And then when the steak arrived, he would do the same pantomime every time. He would lean forward with a look of mock surprise and go, do I hear lowing? And he'd say, a good vet could get that back on its feet in 10 minutes. So he was fantastic. So a real kind of, banter merchant. And Neil Tennant, who arrived later on, who had come from, I think it was Marvel he was working for. Was it Marvel, the publishing, was it? I think, yes. And he was really, really good value, He'd been a big T-Rex fan. as had Ian, and as had we all had, actually. And so that was our kind of memory of what pop music used to be like. We had to think of the way we felt about T-Rex was the way, the kids were going to be feeling about Duran Duran or whatever. And Neil was very funny. Imagine he invented a load of kind of imaginary rock bands played by members of the staff. There's one he cooked up called A Man Alone. And A Man Alone was a kind of, it was based on Ian Birch. In fact, it was Ian Birch who was his pop star. And you could see him on the cover of an album sleeve, kind of just with a kind of looking wistful and windblown on a remote seashore, looking enigmatic with a cigarette. And he invented, for the three girls, Bev and a girl called Petra and Kimberly Leston, he invented a band called the Saturday Girls, which was brilliant, actually, because this was before Bananarama. And the idea was they were just three kind of knockabout girls just in the clothes they wore every day who were going to form a group and kind of dance to Motown songs. So very prophetic, And Neil was, as you mentioned earlier, was the co-inventor of the concept of the Giddy Carousel of Pop. And the basic idea, if I remember there, was that there was a kind of imaginary carousel full of horses, maybe about 10 of them or whatever. And each issue, you always had to have a certain number of groups always represented because they were the key groups of the time. So you imagine that on those horses would be Spandau Ballet and Culture Club, or it was, and Duran Duran and, I don't know, the Thompson Twins or Bad Manners or whoever. And they were the kind of big stories that had to be represented in the magazine. And occasionally one of those people would be booted off the Carousel of Pop and replaced by somebody else. And I loved that. We'd have those ridiculous conversations, Is Gary Newman still, up the dumper? Because the dumper was the place you went when you weren't on the Carousel of Pop. The dumper was a kind of imaginary, sad kind of seaside boarding house that smelt of boiled cabbage and unlit gas pilots. And it was a place where the pop stars went after they'd been on the Giddy Carousel. And you say, well, is Gary Newman still up the dumper? Au contraire! The pale-faced 9-pint blood donor android has suffered a regrettable slump in popularity despite his bold new image and progressive machine-made melodies, and is now in a room next to the Thompson Twins choosing wallpaper. And Doug Trendle of Bad Manners has been over to, offer him a cup of sugar. And I love that whole idea, this sort of daft thing. Who was up the dumper and who was down the dumper and who was on the Giddy Carousel of Pop? So yeah, that's how we, and actually women's magazines kind of went on to do that. I remember Grazia used to say they had the same thing. It wasn't actually a Giddy Carousel, but there were 10 girls that always had to be in every issue. It was Courtney Cox and it was Jennifer Aniston, it was Sienna Miller or whoever it was, and then they'd boot one of those out and replace them with another one. They were the 10 that had to always be represented. So yeah, that's kind of broadly how it worked.
So it did actually serve a purpose. It wasn't just.
Oh, it did. Yeah.
It wasn't just some wild fantasy in the office.
No. There was a weird kind of logic to it.
And the carousel is still spinning decades later.
Yeah.
Neil invented very smash hits expressions. Back was one of his. You were up the dumper, then you were down the dumper, and then you were back. And please was one of his too. I think actually. And we may have invented Dame David Bowie. I can't remember. I think we did invent all that. It got carried on by everybody else. And Sir Lord Lucan of Mercury. And I can remember realising that Smash Hits was kind of affecting language. I can remember going to QPR and they had a striker called Les Ferdinand. And I can remember the crowd, 27,000 people singing Leslie Ferdinand, Sir Leslie Ferdinand. And I felt that had probably come from Smash Hits. We were the first people to call people Dame and Sir and stuff. So yeah, we were changing the language. And also we invented the idea of snogging people. But I don't think you actually snogged anyone at that point. And we had kiss-ups. Having a kiss-up was a kind of innocent physical encounter. And harmless fizzy pop was what you drank when you when you wanted to give the impression that pop stars were pissed, but you couldn't really.
And rock and roll mouthwash.
Yeah.
So as well as changing the language, I know you mentioned when you were in touch with us before about Smash It's almost being like the Facebook of its day as well. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, pre-Facebook, I mean, that's how you met. I mean, when I started, there were about 250,000 readers, and I think there were, not readers, and people who bought it, sorry, sales, 500,000 when I left. So let's say there were two or three, maybe four, an issue. You're talking about 1 million people. And that's how they connected, really. And it was incredibly important. You're in that slightly sulky stage of your life when you're fed up with your parents, you've locked yourself in your bedroom, and you get your copy of Smash Hits, and you write with your wonderful coloured biros, handwritten letters to Smash Hits about signed, Mark Arman's jockstrap, or Nick Rhodes' eyeliner, or whatever it was, thrashing out the important issues of the day. And there were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I can remember the sacks of mail being brought up every morning. And that's how they connected, and and being part of those pop tribes was incredibly important. The idea that you were a Durrani or you were an ant person and were connected to other people was really, really important, particularly for people who lived outside of London, I think.
And what about if I say to you the names Joe Boxers or Roman Holiday? What can you tell us about them?
Joe Boxers and Roman Holiday, well, I can tell you that I put them on the cover of Smash Hits. Idiotically. I mean, that was a very difficult thing. You had to listen to the Mike Reed show and you had to make predictions as to, what in 3 or 4 weeks' time would be on Top of the Pops, because that was the whole thing. You had to get the lyrics, it got to be the hit lyrics of the songs that were on Top of the Pops at that time. And if you got it wrong, you'd spent all that money buying a lyric that, that no one was going to be remotely interested because it wasn't a hit. So I can remember every morning listening to Mike Reed and thinking, right, Joe Boxers, do we take a chance on them? That's got to be a hit. In fact, I think the Joe Boxers did have a hit. Why talk about that? Yeah. The Boxer doing the Boxer beat. I don't think Roman Holiday had a hit at all.
Jimmy the Hoover.
Jimmy the Hoover, I mean, God, no. Matt Fretton, did he have a hit? I don't think he did. Don't think so. I put him on the
outsides of the top 30, but nothing.
Yeah. You were desperate to find new people,
I guess you got it right a lot more times than you got it wrong, though.
Yeah, well, I was constantly trying to kind of try and get new people ready, because I felt you shouldn't be stuck with Spandau Ballet forever, or Duran Duran forever. It's only so many times you could put them on the cover. But actually, it was probably the sensible thing to do was just to carry on kind of milking the ones that were really selling.
So let's launch ourselves into this edition of Smash It. It's like I say, from the 11th of June to the 11th to the 24th of June, 1981, 35p, adamant on the front. Mark, do you want to take us through what's on this cover?
Oh, right. Well, yes. There are no cover lines, interestingly, because cover lines obviously hadn't started. The cover lines are simply Squeeze, Whitesnake, hit lyrics including Will You, All Stood Still and Ghost Town, Human League, Lynx, Hazel O'Connor, In Colour, and Adam and the Ants. No lines. There's none of that. The tax, the tours, the trousers. That kind of outrageous quotes. It's just that was all that was considered to be necessary at the time, I guess. And Adam Ant on the cover, who was a huge deal at the time. We'll come on to the interview in a moment, but I mean, Adam Ant, interestingly, had a complete monopoly over all his photographs. Unbelievably clever bloke, really. He only had a certain number of studio quality pictures taken of himself in the full regalia with the white stripe and all that. And therefore you couldn't really put him on the cover of a magazine if you couldn't put him in the studio and take those pictures yourself, because they owned all the pictures. And as he didn't do any interviews because he was so paranoid about the press being incredibly aggressive towards him, which they were, then you couldn't really, unless you had an interview, which we did. In fact, we went out and got one without permission from the record company or him. You couldn't really put him on the cover. But they were they owned the pictures to the extent that we produced a giant poster of Adam Ant in Smash Hits that was a painting. We had to get someone to paint a picture of him because there just weren't enough decent pictures to utilise. Amazing, really.
Yeah, because it is the only time that he appeared on the front of Smash It, so that explains it. I was going to ask that question.
Well, because the only other pictures you had were ones that were kind of taken live or whatever, which weren't really good enough, So you had complete control over it, really.
So I'll just run through the contents page here. And of course, the big thing that we're all buying Smash Hits for is those lyrics. And in this one, we get Ghost Town by the Specials, Would I Lie to You by Whitesnake, Hot Chocolate, You'll Never Be So Wrong, All Stood Still by Ultravox, Spellbound by Susie and the Banshees, Throw Away the Key by Lynx, Body Talk, Imagination, Nobody Wins, Elton John, no one remembers that one, All Those Years Ago by George Harrison, Going Back to My Roots by Odyssey, 11 O'Clock TikTok, U2, One Day in Your Life, Michael Jackson, More Than in Love by Kate Robbins, the song from Crossroads, Will You by Hazel O'Connor, Let's Jump the Broomstick by Coast to Coast, and then, as Mark's already mentioned, Adam and the Ants, a feature on Whitesnake, Squeeze, and those colour posters of Lynx and the Human League. Because, of course, we remember Smash Hits as being a very colourful magazine, but there were only ever, at this point, I guess the front, the back and the centre spread that were full colour pictures, and then the insides would be black and white photos with colour blocks.
That's right. Oh yeah, Advanced Expensive eventually went full colour. I can remember what an amazing luxury that was. No, you'd only plan colour and spot colour every kind of 8th page, where it was, and there were little sections of it. So yeah, quite a luxury.
Was that under your editorship when it went full colour?
Yeah, it did, yeah, because, they just thought, let's invest in it. It's going through the roof. The sales were just so massive. They thought, well, why not? Throw some money at it and see what happens. And, no, sold even more. It's terrific.
So that first lyric that we get to is Ghost Town by the Specials.
Which is a brilliant ad later on for that, which has a skeleton on it. And you think, isn't it extraordinary, the things that, it's like... Can't Stand Losing You, or was it by the Police? The cover was somebody with a noose round their neck, standing on a block of ice with a 1-bar electric fire melting it. And you thought, this is absolutely extraordinary. This is stuff aimed at kind of 12-year-olds. Wouldn't happen today, I don't think.
But I think it's, for me, it's one of those songs that the further away we get from Ghost Town, the more extraordinary it is and the more extraordinary it sounds. Whereas at the time, it was another pop song that came along, a great pop song. But do you remember hearing it for the first time? What your reaction was?
Yeah, I did. I remember hearing it, actually seeing them play it. It must have been in I think it was late 1980, something like that. And they played it at the Finsbury Park, I think, at the Rainbow. And I remember being knocked out. I mean, this is just huge kind of political impact at the time. And it's amazing how enduring that song is. I mean, it still gets played in documentaries and things as being something that pinpoints a moment in time, and the arrival of Margaret Thatcher, etc., etc. No, it's a brilliant record.
It's still got that magic and potency, hasn't it? And it's kind of unnerving and quite sinister. And I remember reading an interview with Jerry Dammers a few years ago, and he talked about the song Teddy Bear's Picnic being an inspiration. That kind of strange, slightly queasy...
Yeah, queasy, sinister, unsettling.
Yeah, and that unsettling feeling, which I think is what gives it its potency, all these years later.
There's a brilliant clip there's a guy called Rodri Marsden. Have you ever heard of him?
Oh, yeah.
Rodri Marsden does these wonderful things on Twitter where he kind of deconstructs songs and explains how they're played. And he plays the chord sequence from Ghost Town and explains really why it's so eerie and unsettling and extraordinary. It's fantastic.
It's like a really strange sort of fairground ride noise, isn't it? Or something.
Yeah, it is.
It's odd. I think what's really interesting about this as well, and where it is in the magazine, is you've gone from Adamant on the cover to this, and there's really that kind of push and pull throughout a lot of this magazine of sort of entertainment and glamour and image and gimmick and pop frippery, cheek by jowl with like realism and more seriousness, and it's that tension in pop at the time, which I think made things really interesting.
Yeah, well, that's what made it so exciting at the time.
Absolutely.
It was like all those acts that you think of as being ludicrous and old-fashioned and not fitting. You think of Smash Hits as all being about Soft Cell and Human League and Duran Duran and all the kind of ones specifically aimed at kind of teenagers. But actually, what made Top of the Pops so good was that you had to sit through Bonnie Tyler, or you had to sit through Nay and Renata, or you had to sit through some ghastly, school choir or whatever it was, or some heavy metal act you didn't like, and that's what made you appreciate the ones you did like more. And Smash, and the way the magazine was put together, that contrast, really, I think really helped with all that.
OK, shall we move on to the main interview with Adam and the Ants? So some chap called Marc Ellen has tracked down the band in France. Just to set the scene a little, it says, with their 5th top 10 single, Stand and Deliver, still basking at number 1 back on home turf, the Ants are moving through uncharted territory. With them move the kind of trappings that indicate a freshly won platinum status. A massive road crew, an articulated truckload of gear, wardrobe units, merchandise and makeup team and a minder, fresh from service with Led Zeppelin. There's even a trio of silky black limos hired to glide them to this evening's venue, the Krypton Ultra Disco, and then whisk them back to that hotel at a carefully regulated on-stage temperature. So there we go. There's Marc there setting the scene, and we'll talk a little bit about how Marc ended up there and a bit about the interview. But before we do that, there's someone else that we want to introduce into this. This is I feel a bit like Eamon Andrews on This Is Your Life.
Right.
Yeah. And we'll see if Marc remembers this voice.
Oh, all right, go on.
I mean, I remember more about smash hits generally. I remember being in France. I've just read that interview and I don't remember saying any of it. Obviously, it was so long ago. But I don't know what I can specifically tell you about the interview, except that I didn't want to go out in the sun. And I know that Marc spoke to everybody else except me, and then he had to wake me up.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about Marc turning up at all, or?
I was just told, you've got to talk to this bloke from Smash Hits, and I thought, well, OK, that sounds like fun. I don't think I'd met him before. What was his partner's name?
Dave Hepworth?
Dave Hepworth, yeah. I thought I'd met him.
Right.
I remember Adam being a big Smash Hits fan. He was always saying, this is great, this is where we should be, and this is the future and all that.
Do you think that the relationship the band had with Smash Hits was different to like the Enemy and Melody Maker and so on? And if so, how was it different, do you think?
Well, they liked us for a start.
Yeah. Simple as that.
Yeah, they liked us. I don't really understand why the Enemy didn't like us so much. Well, I mean, I do understand. It's because we were successful. They hate success of any kind. It was all very socialist, and I suppose they suspected we had money, and also, we weren't playing the punk game anymore. We'd been through that, and they were still in that. Come the revolution, and it's like we've gone through that. We've done that. Yeah. We'll do something else now. For us, it was completely over. It's completely dead. And we wanted desperately to do something else, which is what we desperately did. And it's like they all seemed to be too late. They were too late with punk. They were too late with, New Romantic. They were too late with the new pop thing. They always missed out on it.
Well, this is where Smash Hits came in, really, isn't it? Because they were right there for all of that.
Well, I mean, they knew what was popular. They knew where their bread was buttered. This is what people want to read. This is what people want to buy. They outsold all the weeklies, didn't they? They were in colour. They had all the most popular bands. And that's what, these bands are not popular because you say they are. They actually really are. People go out and spend their hard-earned money on their records. We sort of fed off them, they fed off us. The more we did, the more we print, the more outrageous we looked, the more pictures they would print, and so it just went round and round and round.
And it kind of worked with video as well, wasn't it? Because videos were coming more popular then as well.
Yeah.
It was good timing, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, I think for anyone's success, anybody who's successful, it's like the planets have to align. Every single thing has to be right, and you've got to be really lucky. You've got to be the right thing at the right time, in the right place. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And we just were.
Fantastic.
That's
really great. When did you record that? Marco Pirroni, when did you record that?
About 2 weeks ago.
That's fantastic. He was so good.
We wanted a little surprise for you.
Yeah, well, that's funny. Interesting he doesn't remember much about it because he wasn't there, actually. He was mostly in bed. He wouldn't come out and be photographed. He wouldn't do any of that stuff. Really funny.
Yeah, he said he didn't like the sun. So
that's right. He didn't. No, he didn't. But no, it's a funny old thing, that because we just thought, look, Adam and the Ants was so huge. We absolutely have to have them on cover. And we can't not have an interview. This is insane. They won all the polls. All the letters were about them. They were just the biggest deal. You forget how huge they were. They were massive. So I just decided, okay, what we'll do is, I'll fly out there. I'll find out where they are. They're on tour in France. I worked out on that Tuesday they were in Aix-en-Provence. And I booked a flight to Aix-en-Provence. Turned up, they had no idea that I was coming. Brought a camera with me. Thought I'd do a photo session. And I arrived at the venue, and they just said, "Oh yeah, well they're here, but they've just done such, and they're just over the road in the cafe." And I went over there. I can remember them being absolutely staggered. And at first they were a little bit nervous because they didn't do any press, because they didn't do it for very good reasons. They never got any favourable press. Literally, I think the only magazine that seemed to like them was us. The music press thought they were terrible, and you forget that. That they had been the kind of punk rock darlings beforehand. It's very interesting. I went with my neighbour, pal of mine, who was a big ant person back in the day. We went to, you thought it'd be amusing, to go to their reunion show at the Apollo, Hammersmith Apollo in 2014. And it was really interesting because half the audience were those kind of gnarled old punks, mostly blokes in their late 50s, green hair, a few chains, leather jackets, do you know what I mean, tattoos. And they'd come to hear him play the whole of Dirk Wears White Socks, which he did. And the other half of the audience, mostly female, were in their kind of late 40s, and there was a few kind of with ribbons in their hair and the old white stripe and a few pirate boots, And halfway through the show, he'd finished all the punk stuff. And there was a kind of screen on the stage. And we were up in the circle at the side, so we could see what was going on. So he went behind the screen, tore off all those punk leathers and stuff. And you can see him hopping about 1 foot trying to pull on his new pair of trousers, his military jacket, whatever. And then appeared out of this thing, going, "I am the dandy highwayman," And at which point, about 50% of the audience literally got up. You hear the seats clacking and kind of marched out. And thought, "Fuck this, we only came for the punk stuff." And the rest, of course, went bonkers because this is what they'd come for. And those two audiences were completely divided. I don't think there was anybody really who liked the early Adam and the Ants and then liked the late period, because actually the early stuff appealed to kind of students in their kind of teens and late 20s, and the rest was deliberately aimed at 12, 13, 14-year-old, mostly girls. So what he'd done was, it was a very, very deliberate thing. It was a bit like Mark Bolan and Tyrannosaurus Rex turning into T-Rex. He thought, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chase some success. I'm going to stop expressing myself. I'm going to stop writing songs that I want to write and plumb the depth of my soul. I'm going to deliberately write songs that appeal to this demographic, and I'm going to have a certain look and a certain choreography and a certain type of video. And it was a really, really deliberate commercial ploy. And he had so many, he had a lot of grievances. Malcolm McLaren had nicked his group. He was very bitter about that. The punk rock fraternity had turned against him, and he was very bitter about that. The press absolutely detested him. So he had a lot of points to prove and really wanted to win. So it was really interesting because when he saw me at first, he was really cautious. He thought, actually, this guy, this is Smash Hits who love us. This guy who I've never met, who's come all the way out here on spec, he's hardly going to stitch us up, is he? And he was incredibly forthcoming. He was really, really funny, and I thought they were fantastically entertaining. And I did a little session. As you said, Marco didn't turn up, but I photographed them. So to get pictures of the ants at all as an amateur photographer was going to be quite a big deal. So, it went really well. It was a big success. And my God, it sold. It sold just vast numbers. Huge.
That was the first issue I bought because I just got into Adam and the Ants around, like Dog Eat Dog, Kings of Wild Frontier time. But I'd never bought any music papers at all up until that point. But then when I saw that on the newsagent shelves, that was me dipping my toe into the world of music press. It took me another few months before I started buying it regularly. But I must have read this issue back to front, cover to cover 100 times,
Oh, that's great.
It's still kind of imprinted on me now, when I look at it, it's all so familiar. It's really strange.
Oh, that's so funny. The French didn't quite know what to make of it because they weren't very big in France at the time. Him going on stage, Marco, Merrick, Terry Lee, Gary Tibbs, and yours truly. And it's so funny also to see them getting dressed up. I mean, Gary Tibbs wasn't too bad because he'd been a member of Roxy Music, so the idea of pulling on the old Buccaneer boots or the pirate stuff or whatever it was, or the Prince Charming stuff was fun. But Marco reminded me of those pictures you used to see of spiders from Mars. Do you remember seeing Woody Woodsmansey and those guys being kind of told to put on their spandex trousers and their big boots? The kind of, do I have to wear this boss features that we used to run in Q magazine, And Marco is very much like that. But no, they were great. They were fantastic.
When we spoke to him, he said that was one of his least favourite aspects, wasn't it? doing the videos and the dressing
Yeah.
up. But it was part of the job, so he did it. But
Also,
yeah,
I love
not
the fact that
entirely
all those
comfortable
people
with
have been through punk rock are disguised the kind of music that they grew up with and stuff that they liked. Because Adam really loved Rory Gallagher and he loved Argent. His favourite group was The Doors. You know, it was like Johnny Rotten. Johnny Rotten's favourite group was Van de Graaff Generator, but there'd been this kind of Stalinist revision of history where he couldn't talk about those. He had to say, the only people who had to talk about it were cool were kind of David Bowie and Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. That was basically where punk rock kind of started, you know. So, you know, but where you then discovered that Wham had been to see Genesis and as had the members of Spandau Ballet, and because that's what everybody did, because that's what was around, you know. And no, he was brilliant, Adam. Really good value.
I think what was interesting, he talks about it in this article about them creating an audience, because it was such a strange concept, wasn't it? The the kind of noble sort of Native American Indian with like two drummers and the glam rock thing, and then the Prince Charming and the Dandy Highwayman. It wasn't like anyone had done it before and they were just going, well, we'll copy that. It was completely from another planet, but it was still massily successful.
Totally from another planet. You couldn't do it now. Couldn't do it now because you'd be accused of cultural appropriation.
No.
There'd be an outcry. You know, you'd be lynched. There'd be demonstrations outside the venues. But yeah, and it was really original. It was a really good time. It was a great time for Smash Hits. It was fantastic. And they were one of the first groups who really got onto that. Their live performances didn't matter. This wasn't what it was about at all. It was entirely about the videos. And, you know, and that was the big revolution that was happening. You know, up till, I don't know, 1979 or whatever, you know, groups, the Jam, the Stranglers, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, the Police, they all got there by going out and playing every single tiny little venue they could. And after about, you know, it's 79, 80, it was just entirely videos. You know, you could play by one performance on, you know, by making one video, you could reach more people than you could ever reach in your entire life on the live circuit. So, you know, it was all the, you know, it was Eurythmics and the duos, the groups without rhythm sections. It was brilliant.
But I guess Adam Ant especially was the first big pop star of the 80s. And you mentioned that when this issue came out, that it sold by the bucket load. So do you think, you know, that it was just that nice coincidence that Smash Hits was just starting to really bloom at this time and Adam Ant came along and all these things just kind of lined up nicely?
Yeah, I think it was just our time, wasn't it? You know, if you think about it, none of the other press really could represent any of these groups very well. Partly because of the paper quality. I know that's rather a dull reason, but it's true. The Inkies simply couldn't do colour reproduction at all well. It's only really Us in the Face and the odd other magazine like Blitz that could do it. So, and Smash Hits was just a perfect package for that whole generation of people who were watching Top of the Pops and listening to Radio 1 and they weren't old enough to go out. That's the interesting thing, I think. Smash Hits readers read Smash Hits until they were old enough to go to concerts. The moment they went to concerts, they stopped going. That was my theory. And I'm absolutely sure I'm right. Because up until then, it's about escape and it's about being stuck in the bedroom and it's about fantasizing about what the adult world would be like. And you've got your lyrics and you've got your interviews and you've got your posters and you've got, you know, the radio and the TV. And if you link that little electrical circuit together, the fairy lights come on and you've got the whole pop experience. But you could always tell when people were about to leave the Smash Hits. You know, they'd write to the letters page and they'd say, yeah, I went to this amazing concert last night, you know, Leicester de Montfort Hall, and it was the Duranis, you know, and then they'd talk about the support group coming on first, some support group you've never heard of, and how fantastic they were, and they would say it was really exciting, and we all got drinks, and then the lights kind of went down, and this group came on, and they waved at us, and they played these songs, and they were wearing this, and they were wearing that, and the lights were orange, and then they were green, and then the lights went up again, and we all clapped, and they went off, and then the Duranis came on, and they did this, and Simon said that, you know, incredible detail, absolutely amazing, and they were just so kind of hyped up about the whole thing. They had to tell someone, and Smash Hits was the person to tell, and you could tell that once they'd gone to a concert, the world of Smash Hits didn't matter anymore. They were actually out in the real world, and they just didn't really need us, you know. That's the point when they probably started reading, I don't know, the music press, or just sticking with the Face or whatever. Interesting, really.
So we move through the rest of the interview. We see Mark's picture of Marco in bed, sitting up there, and then we've got...
he was very bad-tempered about that, so I've got to take a picture of him.
We've got an advert for Heaven Appear by Echo and the Bunnymen, more of which later. And then we come to some of the lyrics. So we've got Whitesnake, Hot Chocolate, Susie and the Banshees and Ultravox on this page, and I just wanted to, very quickly, it'd be remiss of us, I think, to go past this page without just mentioning the poetic majesty of White Snake's Would I Lie to You, which features, if you just allow me to read a little poetry here. Si mentioned earlier about satin sheet action, and it comes from this song. There's a couple of verses here. It says, "Hey girl, if you need some love and affection, I'll whisper all the sweet, sweet nothings I know you little girls like to hear. Now listen, if you would change your mind, we could find a night of satin sheet action. I promise I won't do anything, babe, unless you wanted me to. And that's a fact."
And that's a fact. That's a fact. That's a great lyric, isn't it? Again, another thing that wouldn't be allowed today. Hashtag different
Absolutely
times.
not.
Oh my God. I know all those cliches in heavy rock songs, all kind of people talk about giving every inch of my love, and kind of taking their loving on the run, all that kind of nonsense, you know. Oh, Christ.
So you've actually professed a bit of a liking for this song, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did actually buy a Whitesnake record around this time. I was only 7 years old, but my sister was well into rock music, and so it just kind of filtered down. You know, whatever she was listening to, I'd invariably end up listening to it and going out and buy it. So I'd bought a Whitesnake record, but I didn't know this one, and I quite like it. I mean, it's got. I mean, David Coverdale was a soul boy anyway, and I think if you listen to this song, it's a crunchy riff, but if you imagine that being done as like a Stax record kind of thing, you could hear, Booker T and the MGs and the Memphis Horns kind of, blasting that one out. It needed a bit of a lyrical tweak, I think.
Might do.
If Otis Redding or Sam and Dave were going to attempt it, and particularly the album version, which has got a line that's not included in the lyrics here in Smash It. It's something about would I lie to you just to get into your pants or something like that.
That's right.
What?
Delightful.
And then he does this kind of funny little laugh, and it's like, oh dear.
That's not good.
It's not aged well, has it? I mean, I know any lyrics can sound bad out of context, but they...
I don't think
there's no excuse for that.
There's not much context either there, is there?
God, look, Ultravox. Well, I can remember seeing Ultravox when they were Tiger Lily. I remember seeing them in 1975, playing the Oxpens Market Festival in Oxford. And, all going nowhere, and then got midget and it all took off. They were huge at the time.
Yeah.
Vienna was a big hit, and was it 1980, wasn't it? So they were really, really big. So what have we got? Bits pages.
Yeah,
wow.
we get to bits, and what I always call the beating heart of the carousel. I think it's such an important part of the magazine. This, for me, it was when I was buying it every fortnight as a kid. Yeah. It was the section that I'd turn to first. I mean, usually it was first in the magazine by the mid-'80s anyway. But do you agree that it provided a very important function for Smash Hits?
Well, I think the interesting thing about Smash Hits was it was so much broader than people think. People who didn't read it just thought it was all just, I don't know, Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran. Whatever. But, look at this. You've got to think about Elvis Presley. It was a thing about... the Talking Heads and the Tom Tom Club, who actually went on to have huge hits. Actually, the thing about Ian Dury and the Blockheads. There's bands splitting up, magazine. This is slightly the Scars. I mean, this is slightly off the beaten track. There's a thing about rapping. In fact, the piece starts with "Rapping's back." Now the idea that in 1981 you're writing saying rapping's back, most people would not know what rapping was, but actually Smash Hits have been really, really very quick on all this stuff. I can remember we had a cover story with Malcolm McLaren on the cover. It must have been about, I don't know, maybe 83, 84, something like that, when he had the Duck Rock album out and explained the whole concept of scratching and Grandmaster Flash and a really brilliant piece by a guy called Dave Rimmer. Been out to New York, interviewed all these people, explained exactly what this whole revolution was all about. And that was before a lot of the music press were actually doing it. I think the Smash Hits was very, very early on the case for all this stuff. What else we got here? We got Kid Creole. Well, Kid Creole, right about Kid. In fact, they went on to have some hits, but I mean that's Ian Birch, kind of the inner melody maker writer coming out there, who's just really interested in Z Records and everything they did. But by doing that, and even Glenn Tilbrook talking about his favourite records: Jimi Hendrix, Robert Wyatt, the Monkees, the Beatles, Elvis Costello, the Undertones. I mean that's Kazanat's Cats. I mean, this is educational stuff, I mean, a lot of people, the first time they ever heard about Robert Wyatt or Jimi Hendrix or whatever was from reading this magazine.
And that Castanet's Cats song, I love that. I've fallen in love with it. I'd never heard it before. Quick Joey Small, Run Joey Run.
Yeah.
And he calls it the first ever punk record. And it's kind of like I think it's great, like a psychedelic bubblegum punk record from the late 60s. But if you've never heard it, listeners, I recommend you go and give it a spin.
Yeah.
And the kind of rapping, just going back to that, I mean, it's not really... I think the point that this is making, this piece, because it mentions, who is it, Barnsley Bill. I had to listen to his record, Barnsley Rap, and his rhymes don't scan too well. He's not quite got what all these rap things about. And then there's the Wicker rap, which is supposedly like an Alan Wicker type voice.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's mentioned it appears, I think, in the dance chart and again in the independent chart a little bit later on in the magazine. Yeah. But I mean, it's a very poor joke that wears thin very, very quickly.
Quite a big hit, that record. Amazing. Yeah.
But yeah, kind of like in the vein of sort of Rapper's Delight and lots of other little bits of other songs coming in and out. But yeah, I think it goes on to make the point that, Tom Tom Club, Wordy Rapping Hood, aimed squarely at the more intelligent end of the market.
I think it's very interesting that all the Smash Hits readers around the time of this kind of issue are all now the kind of people in there, whatever they are, late 40s, 50s, whatever. People like Pete Buffedes who are writing books about their affection for pop music. And he wrote a thing about, just taking this picture of Martha and the Muffins here. And he wrote a wonderful thing in his book, Broken Greek, about how when he heard Echo Beach by Martha and the Muffins, he realised that this meant that adulthood was going to be disappointing. There's a line when she says, from 9 to 5, I have to spend my time at work. My job is very boring. I'm an office clerk, to give it its American pronunciation. And all she wants to do is be on Echo Beach. And he said that's his picture of adulthood. It was going to be this boring world where you had to sit in an office. And it's very sweet. You think about people when he was, I don't know, 6 or 7 or whatever, he was listening to Sting's Roxanne. And he thought it was so noble that Sting was saving these prostitutes from this terrible
Single-handedly.
life. Single-handedly. What a hero he was. It's absolutely brilliant. He wrote this lovely thing about the Wombles, and when he says, it was all about a class thing, about overground, underground, wombling free. The Wombles of Wimbledon, common are we. And he couldn't get over this idea that there was, somehow they were Wombles were working class and all the posh people might disapprove of them. It's fantastic.
The Wombling proletariat.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. But no, it's really interesting. Look, Thin Lizzy's in there. B-52s. B-52s is interesting. The readers never liked the B-52s. And I don't really know why not. I suppose because they're American. A lot of it, you couldn't relate to American groups if you were 12, 13, 14 or whatever. You just couldn't quite get the cultural references. If there'd been a British group who kind of wore a load of tat they bought in junk shops and boot sales and looked like that and wore, bouffant wigs, they might have liked them. I don't know, but they just didn't understand. They couldn't relate to the B-52s at all. It was kind of an adult joke. It's a shame because they look great.
I think America was like another planet then, wasn't it?
Completely. They just couldn't contextualise it. They couldn't figure out what it was all about. They weren't kind of old enough, But yeah, Bits, what a mixture of stuff. Very educational. Smash Hits was educational. We used to interview Paul Weller about his favourite books, and he talked about George Orwell and stuff like that. And people have said to me in the past that they read George Orwell because Paul Weller was going on about it. And so I think we did good work, actually, beyond just your lyrics and your harmless fizzy pop.
Yeah, and the Bits ends, it's just Bits, ends with Marco Pirroni's personal file. And Gavin asked Marco when we met up with him a few weeks ago, so some of the questions, and let's have a listen to what his answers were to see if they matched up what was in the mag.
The other thing I wanted to go through in the magazine is that in the Bits section, there's a thing called personal file, which is like a little questionnaire. I guess Mark probably did it with you in the hotel, maybe. Yeah. And what I wanted to see is how 4 decades on, how much you remember your answers. So
I still have those.
Yeah, have you still got the same answers? So
I'm sure it'll be exactly the same.
Let's see if you how well does Marco from 2021 remember Marco from 1981. So question number 1, the question was, what was your high spot of education? What do you think you might have said? I
can't remember. My high spot of education was being thrown out of art school.
Very good. Yeah, I'll give you that.
That was my favourite. Being
singled out at college for having green bits in my hair. I actually found out that the teachers had been told to ignore what I wore and not comment on it. I was so proud.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I mean, I actually met somebody who went to college with me, and they said, well, they were in the year below, and they said, we didn't know what you were.
So what were you dressing as? What were you wearing at the time?
I was wearing clothes from sex, like 50s clothes and, proto-punk, but kind of brighter, proto-glam punk.
Oh, this might have been about 76?
Yeah, 76.
Yeah.
75, 76. Because punk hadn't broken yet. No one knew what it was. No one had ever heard of it. I just thought, well, we didn't know. We just thought you were you. We didn't know. We didn't know what you were doing or why you were doing it. What is he wearing today? And
what has he got on?
Yeah, what has he got on? Yeah.
And this was at art college. I mean, that's generally quite a liberal kind of...
it wasn't. It may be now, and it may have been in the 60s, but it wasn't then. It was really, really, really...
Well, everyone else was wearing cheesecloth and loon pants.
Yes, cheesecloth and loon pants, and riding mopeds for some reason.
OK, the next question Mark asked you was your first crush.
Did I say Lindsay DePaul?
You did say Lindsay DePaul. Very good.
Oh.
Question 3, what was your proudest achievement? I'll be impressed if you remember this one. Because I think you may have made this up, but I don't know.
I don't know.
It was eating 6 cream crackers in 1 minute.
Well, I mean...
it's a good achievement.
What can you be your proudest achievement at 21? I got some brothel creepers. I mean, we were number one. I mean, I couldn't think of anything. It's like they're obviously kind of like teenage silly questions, and I gave them teenage silly answers.
What would you think your Desert Island disc was at the time?
Pyjama Armour.
Correct.
It always has been and always will be, I think.
Worst venue ever played?
That could have been 2. It was either Middlesbrough Rock Garden or this Retford Porterhouse.
It was one of those 2. If you had to plump on one of them.
I think it was Retford Porterhouse because that was particularly
you went the wrong way.
Oh.
Yeah. Middlesbrough Rock Garden. What happened at Middlesbrough Rock Garden? Was there a particular incident?
There was a massive fight, as there always used to be in those days.
Yeah.
And they wanted to... It was the strange sort of, how punks thought that they would show that they loved you, which is by throwing things at you. And
spitting on you.
And spitting on you and then trying to beat you up afterwards. This is how we love you. I actually met a guy at some gig about 10 years ago. He said, oh, do you remember playing Middlesbrough Rock Garden? I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm one of the blokes who threw coins at you. Well, you come up and tell me that. What am I supposed to say?
Thanks very much. Yeah.
You're a wanker now and you're a wanker then. It's like... why would you even admit that?
Yeah, it's a strange thing. You'd think you'd be embarrassed, or at least have the decency to be embarrassed and go, I'm really sorry, mate.
Yeah, some people...
proudest moment.
Yeah, some people have come up and go, do you remember being at a club at some... And I go, no. And I said, what? I called you a wanker and I'm really, really sorry. And I said, oh, it's okay, don't worry.
Yeah. But at least you said you're sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
OK, last question from this personal file. It asked for your favourite hero or heroine, and you gave 3 answers. I'll give you a clue. They're all heroes, actually. Who do you think the 3 guys you chose were?
Brian Ferry, Link Ray, and James Bond, probably.
No, I can't. You're in the right ballpark. You have got an ex-member of Roxy.
Andy Mackay.
Yeah, you've got Andy in there.
Yeah.
One of the Spiders.
Mick Ronson.
And then an actor.
Sean Connery. I don't know.
Lawrence Harvey.
Oh, Lawrence Harvey, yeah.
Was he out of Room at the Top?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think you put that.
I thought he was dead cool.
Favourite film?
I thought he was proto Brian Ferry. I think Brian Ferry probably thought that as well.
We're on to another lyric page. We've got Links, Throw Away the Key and Imagination, Body Talk. And again, Si always does a video playlist for each episode that we do. And Imagination, there's a great Top of the Pops performance, which some of the listeners may remember. But if not, again, I I commend you to go and have a look, because it's really quite the performance. Lee Johns, the lead singer, is basically writhing around on a piano, and then the bass player. I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to read one of the comments that comes from someone called Sue Condon, and this is on YouTube. She says, "Great bass riff, wonderful piano composition, completely destroyed by a ridiculous camped-up performance. But oh my, I can't take my eyes off the bass player's tights."
No, tights.
And I should say no more.
Tights, that's good.
Well, they're very tight trousers or leggings, but
spray on.
You can see a lot. Let's leave that there.
Lee John subs Test Nightmare, because Lee John were 3 E's in Lee.
Oh, the 3 E's, Lee.
It's like Lionel Richie. There's no T in Lionel Richie. And Meatloaf, 2 words. B-52s has an apostrophe. Dexys, no inverted comma. I can remember all these. Mark Brzezinski. You got to, just Shakespeare's sister. If you worked on a music magazine, you had to memorise all these ones that were difficult to spell.
Well, Mark became Mark Unpronounceable.
Mark Unpronounceable name, exactly.
So that was a lot easier.
Yeah.
Just interestingly enough, we were just talking about Lee there. He recently popped up on my cultural radar again. There's on iPlayer at the moment a series of films directed by Steve McQueen called Small Axe.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one called Red, White and Blue, which tells a true story of a guy called Leroy Logan, who was a police officer in the Metropolitan Police in the 80s.
Yeah.
And Lee is in that, not Lee Johns himself, but an actor playing Lee, because he was one of Leroy's best friends. And Lee's mother was a police liaison officer, and her character's in it as well, and she helped influence Leroy's career. So it was just really strange watching that, because I'd been watching Body Talk, and then later that evening I put the telly on, and then there's the character of Lee Johns, and in real life he was best friends, and they're still friends now. There was a picture of them on social media not long ago, out enjoying a meal, together. I think it's pretty sweet that they were childhood friends that are still together.
Oh,
now.
wow. No Lee Johns moments for years, then suddenly three come along at one.
I know.
Right. Amazing.
And that's just the bass player's time.
Yeah.
Three were definitely coming at the same time there. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, moving on, and we get to, we've already encountered Whitesnake and the lyrics for one of their songs in there, but now we get a feature on them as well, which, I mean, on one hand you do wonder what on earth this is doing in here, but on the other it is worth remembering that rock, or metal as we may have called it at that time, was pretty big. It was in the charts, it was on top of the pops, and I think that's something that's been forgotten over the years, probably because those bands don't form the accepted narrative of that era, synth pop, new romantics and that sort of thing. But I think also it's because, it's something that Chris Charlesworth, who's the writer of this piece, he says, Whitesnake perform music that owes little or nothing to trends. So I think that's possibly one reason why the rock music of this era kind of stands separate and gets forgotten a little bit. But I found it unusual seeing Chris Charlesworth's name in Smash.
Yeah, the old MM writer, wasn't he? Yeah. Lovely geezer. But, I mean, he probably had access to this group. They probably wouldn't have done this with Smash Hits. Maybe he'd done this with something else and just creamed off a few quotes. I've got no idea. I can't imagine. I don't know why we would have run a 2-page piece about Whitesnake, for God's sake. I mean, I think a lyric covers it, don't you? I mean, you don't want a poster, but I mean, my God, 2 pages. A lot of it's about, it's virtually all those cliches about, handling the bass chores and, the nifty sticksman behind the kit. It's all about, who the new bass player is and all that kind of stuff, which if anybody really cares. So it doesn't really have a Smash Hits agenda at all. It seems to have flown in from Melody Maker. Very odd. We stopped all that pretty soon.
Yeah, lots of chat about Deep Purple and talking about 1971, which, in talking about 1971 and 1981, it feels like really ancient history.
It does.
It's like has absolutely no relevance to the pop kids of that time. But I do like David Coverdale's little quote here, talking about his love of music and where his inspiration comes from for his songs. And he says, "My real love is the blues. And although the old bluesmen wrote about social conditions, they also wrote songs about women in expressive ways. My lyrics are basically diaries, but a lot of the lyrics about girls are tongue-in-cheek." And on satin.
I rather enjoyed the sort of Derek Smalls type pronouncements of John Lord as well. He's at the grand old age of 40 now, one of rock's elder statesmen, as he's called. And I love it. I can imagine, like Derek Smalls with his pipe kind of pontificating. And he says, if at the end of 1981 the band is no further forward than it was at the end of 1980, we shall have to take a long look at the situation.
That's brilliant. That's great.
And also he's talking about David's lyrics, and he says, kind of addressing, I guess, the charges of perhaps some slightly dodgy lyrics. And he says, younger writers and emerging bands are obviously more socially aware because that's a phase that a young man goes through between school and his mid-20s, says Lord. I had a duffel coat and college scarf period when I wanted to change the world. I'm not putting it down one bit. The new wave certainly brought about more socially aware lyrics, but that doesn't mean David has to write like that. To say that all rock music must be socially aware is to say that all classical music should consist of Beethoven and his contemporaries. Music can be all things to all people. That's what's so great about it.
That's quite good, actually, isn't it? I'm being unkind about my astonishment about how this piece was ever in there in the first place, because that's quite an interesting point, really. Bless him. But, that seems so old. Somebody of 40. I'm just looking at the next page, and there's an Elton John lyric, and there's a George Harrison lyric. So Elton John would have been about, I suppose, 34, 35 maybe. George Harrison would have been 38, wouldn't he? I mean, he was born in 43. So, yeah, he would have been 38 years old. And that seems so old. I mean, that just seemed just unimaginably. It's pensionable, wasn't it? 38 at that time. My God. So what else we got? We got the disco page with Robin Katz, page 21. That's funny. The disco, I think that's before Boppin' Bev Hillier wrote her wonderful funk column. But I think they were really important, those little columns. Because again, they were little escapes to the adult world. If you liked the funk world that Bev was writing about Southern Freeze, those kind of records, Kool and the Gang, stuff that was going on, K-Still Weekenders, Girls in White Stilettos, kind of, just dancing to that kind of dance music. That would have been really, really exciting because you're stuck in your bedroom reading smash hits thinking, God, I'd love to be at an event like that. So I think they were really important, those little windows to the outside world, actually.
They just add a bit more colour again, don't they? Like the indie page and the disco page.
They do. They do, yeah.
I think having the disco top 40 in there, because a lot of the song titles are familiar, but it just reframes the charts in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
So it gives you, you can recognise some of the songs in there, and it just gives you a little flavour that, these songs are actually part of something else that's going on.
And we've got a very early feature, I guess, on level 42 here on the disco page by Robin Katz. And again, we get a mention of Adam Ant, actually. It says, as 3 of the 4 are qualified drummers, I wonder if they intended bringing a double drum sound to their upcoming album.
Which the Ants, Ant's got credit for being the first to do that. But I'm sorry, the Glitter Band were there first. Can't really mention them, but it's a fact.
It says, we did some double drumming on earlier stuff, but the media is only just becoming aware of that. The Burundi sound has been around for a long time. It's just that Adam wrapped it up with Gary Glitter and made the formula trendy.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure we'll use it again.
Brilliant.
Oof.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I see lurking there at number 7 on the Disco Top 40. 2 weeks ago, it was number 1. It was Stars on 45.
Oh, Christ.
By Star Sound.
We ran a feature in Smash Hits where we went out and we took out copies of Stars on 45 and got members of the public to destroy them in colourful ways. One of whom was Boy George. Boy George, before he was Boy George. He was George O'Dowd and he worked in a little clothes shop round the corner. Unmistakably him, and we ran a little picture of him saying, this is George, and he was sawing up a copy of a Stars on 45 record. Brilliant. It's a great feature.
On to the next page, we've got, first of all, a little advert for REO Speedwagon. For their...
Not a little advert.
Full
page.
A full page advert.
Full page for your REO Speedwagon.
In black and white, but still full page for their chart-topping album, High Infidelity. That's very clever. Featuring the smash hit single, of course, Keep On Loving You. And get a free T-shirt if you buy a copy of the first 10 albums or cassettes purchased this week from the following dealers.
At these dealers, that went on all the time. of chart return shops. See, you could tell a chart return shop. There was one in Chiswick where I still live, actually, and and there was a non-chart return shop. The non-chart return shop was kind of drab-looking place. Chart return shop, they just had massive free gifts in the window, didn't they? You could buy a Bananarama 7-inch single. You get given the 12-inch free or something. There was even a room where there was a record came out called "Hole in My Shoe," the old Traffic song by Neil from the Young Ones. Got to number 2, interesting, and I put him on the cover. The right thing to do. And I think in certain shops you could get a free pair of trainers with, which is pretty astonishing, with a copy of that record. So the amount of bribery and corruption that went on was phenomenal, really. Kipper Williams did a brilliant cartoon. I can remember we did a piece about chart return shops, and Kipper Williams did a great cartoon for it with a picture of a chart return shop, and he had all these records you could buy, and one of them had the Mona Lisa attached to it. So you got free with the records, just brilliant, bags of gold. It's a simple cartoon idea. It's great.
Well, if you went to Parrot Records of Colchester or Brady's of Preston, you'd get a T-shirt. As Si pointed out to me earlier on, it doesn't say what was on the T-shirt, presumably REO Speedwagon, but we don't know. So. I'll just need to share with you as well, because it was only the other week looking at this, because I've seen this image, as I was saying, this issue of Smash Hits is kind of imprinted on my brain. And I always used to think that the woman was playing some kind of exotic African horn or something. I thought it was like a short horn that she was playing, and I've just realised that she's actually putting on lipstick and looking in a mirror.
Oh, she's got a little folding mirror.
Oh, yeah.
That's taken me 4 decades to work that one out.
That's right. I was rather astounded that at the bottom of the advert it mentions that REO Speedwagon have also got other albums available. You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish. Mm-hmm. And a decade of rock and roll, 1970 to 1980 double album. I didn't even know REO Speedwagon had been going that long.
Christ.
Who knew?
So, but obviously that is 11 o'clock. Is it a request spot for U2? It's pretty amazing. U2 hadn't had a hit, I don't think.
No.
Had they? I don't think they had.
I checked, and it was out, 2 months before they had their first hit in the UK.
New Year's Day, was that their first hit, or which was?
No, it was Fire from the October album.
Fire, right? Yeah, got to number 35. I remember now.
Yeah, just sort of scraped in there for a couple of weeks. But interestingly enough, it's requested by somebody in Dublin, and obviously U2 had hit the charts in 1979 with their first EP, so they would have been more known over there. But saying that, I found an archive of the Irish charts on the internet, and 11 o'clock TikTok didn't make the charts over there.
Well, we had a bit of affection for them, and I'd seen U2 about a year before, I think, in Bracknell Sports Centre, half filled. They were completely unknown. And they were obviously on the way up, but I think we just kind of quite liked them, really. And actually, they never really were that much big a deal for Smash Hits anyway, because even when they're successful, they never quite worked as a pop group. They're a rock band. But there they are.
Okay, leafing through, we've got a double-page spread of links, and then a full-page colour advert for New Sounds, New Styles.
Oh, yeah, being produced out of the Smash Hits office, which didn't last very long, but it was quite a good idea. It was a very, very narrow band. That, basically it started with Blue Rondo a la Turk, and it kind of pretty much ended with them too, actually. That was pretty much the only band that fitted New Sounds, New Styles. Chris Sullivan and Blue Rondo, they had a hit called, a non-hit actually, called Clacto Vide Sustain. I can remember they used to come in the office all the time, hang around in their zoot suits. They were great, actually. They were really nice. But it wasn't really going anywhere. It fizzled out very quickly.
And then we get to page 27 and the winter motorbike competition.
Well, that's astonishing, isn't it? Because that looks like a 125cc motorcycle. I mean, how old did you have to be to ride a motorbike? Was it 17 or was it 16? I think it was probably 17.
16 or 17.
Maybe 16. I mean, incredible. So, and I mean, so how many of the readers were actually eligible to even? I mean, I suppose you could send off one and win at the age of 11 and then have it stuck in a garage for 6 years. I don't know. But I mean, that's just one of those things where Smash Hits was published by EMAP, and EMAP was based in Peterborough, where they had a lot of bike titles, and they would have just been able to get bikes for free for competitions and shoved one our way. But it doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
How did the competitions work in general? I mean, did you have to go looking for prizes, or did companies approach you, or did they approach EMAP and say...
Well, in the end, they approached us, but in the early days, you have to ring people up and say, can we have a few, signed Boomtown Rats records or whatever, and beg, steal and borrow. But no, they really took off. And amazing, any competition at all got the most fantastic response. Just you think now that people had to you had to write it or send a postcard or whatever. You had to get the postcard and write it and put a stamp on it and address it and go out and post it and then sit and wait to see in the unlikely event that out of thousands of other people, your name would appear in the magazine as the lucky winner of a signed Toyota 7-inch. Yeah, pretty amazing, really.
Or in this case, a motorbike or a Barry Sheen flexi-disc.
Exactly.
Which I think is more tempting to me than the motorbike.
I'd rather have the Barry Sheen flexi as well.
Yeah.
That's great. Tommy Vance used to run a heavy metal program, and his motto, one of his slogans was "More metal than Barry Sheen's legs." Good.
So we move on to the next page and we get to the singles reviews.
Oh, yeah. This is
reviewed by Fred Della, recently passed away.
He did.
What can you tell us about Fred?
Well, the interesting pop fact about Fred, when he reviewed these singles, is he was already 50 years old. As you say, he died very sadly the other day. And I think he was either 89 or 90. Amazing guy. I loved Fred. And actually, the reason Fred was in Smash Hits was entirely to do with Dave. And Dave, very sweetly, Dave used to work in the HMV record shop, wanted to break into, music journalism. And Fred, who worked for the NME, used to come in all the time and buy records. And eventually Dave said to him, "Look, Fred, how do I do this? How do I get in?" And I think Fred might have just said, "Write to the NME and write to this person, send something off," or whatever. But anyway, all I know is that Fred was the reason that Dave first got published, and Dave never forgot it. He absolutely adored him and was so grateful, and very sweetly always used to, when we started Q Magazine, I think Fred was on Q Magazine too. And it was so funny because, he was 50 years old at the time, which seemed old. It was twice as old as I was, He'd come in with his funny old belted Macintosh, and I discovered that he had been the local person in charge of his Frank Sinatra fan club when he was about 15 or 16. So, and he seemed quite old, but yet when you read these reviews, here he is, he's reviewing the Angelic Upstarts, Bram Tchaikovsky, Time and Dog. And amazing. There we were talking about the width, the breadth, the diversity of Smash Hits. Time and Dog, who was, I don't know, worked with the Moody Blues, wasn't he? He was a psychedelic guy, made records with Jimmy Page. And he's in Smash Hits, Toots and the Maytals. Just Joe Ely, for God's sake. Joe Ely, kind of country star. It's just interesting that all those people finished up in Smash Hits being reviewed really sympathetically. He's very good, Fred, I think. I was just reading these a minute ago, and he's got a review of Susie and the Banshees' Spellbound. And he says, "A winner, despite Susie's arch vocals, now all part of the Renton actress scene foisted on a gullible public, brain-numbed by TV commercials and memories of rock follies. Compensation, however, comes in the form of an enthralling 12-string gallop that encompasses high hurdles and water jumps, keeping the listeners on the edge of their shooting sticks till the post is reached. Sort of spellbound, in fact." That's a brilliant review.
That's
and
wonderful.
the readers will have no idea, but not a lot of those kind of reference points. The whole thing about the shooting sticks in the horse. But it's just a really, really good, really interesting selection of stuff. So we did used to. You reviewed all those things because, partly because you thought some of them outsiders might be hits, so you should cover them, but partly because you were just interested yourself in thinking, well, Time and Dog record, I'll sit and write something about that. But again, really educational for the readers, I'm saying.
I like some of his slaggings off. They're very good. The Grasshoppers, which was Mike Reed, the Radio 1 DJ, one of his bands.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a song called Teardrops Fall Like Rain, and it says, "A lacklustre attempt to make a Buddy Holly-styled hit, using a song fashioned by one-time crickets Jerry Allison and Glenn Hardin. But Buddy Holly died in 1959. This record died about 20 seconds after being placed on the turntable."
Back of the net from Fred. Very good work. And also the album reviews are great too. Eddie Grant, and I reviewed Doll by Doll. That's pretty esoteric stuff for Smash Hits, isn't it? It's great that they're all in there. Brilliant.
Ghost Town gets reviewed by the Specials, which he quite likes and he says nice things about. And there's some other big records in here as well. Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs, which at the time I don't think it broke the top 40, but then on the back of the film a few years later, it became a hit. And obviously now it's their most well-remembered song. And Kirsty MacColl makes it into there as well, where there's a guy who works down the chip shop, swears he's Elvis.
Genuinely great record, though.
Yeah.
She was fantastic, Kirsty MacColl.
He says, "Isn't the title wonderful?"
Yeah. We put her on the cover. We put her on the cover once around the time of that record. Actually, so it would have been a couple of issues later.
I'm just interested to know, because we get the album reviews next, and in this one you're reviewing, you give 9 out of 10 to Echo and the Bunnymen, Doll by Doll as well, a solid 8 out of 10 there. But are there any albums that you've reviewed over the years that have, you've done this for work, but they've become personal favourites?
Oh, I think quite a few, actually. I'm just pretty embarrassed by this review. It's just so pretentious, isn't it? The opening line is, the opening sentence is, forsaking the usual notions of tune and immediacy. The Bunnymen take atmosphere as their main text. I mean, that is just absolutely awful, isn't it? It's shameful. What was I thinking? I don't know. No, I didn't review that many records, actually. But, I mean, I love the Bunnymen. I still think they're really good, actually. I've got fond memories of that whole period. Teardrop Explodes, I interviewed a few times. Thought they were fantastic. I don't know. I mean, the difficulty about album reviews is that you often really regret them because you didn't have time to really... you're reviewing them because you're either reviewing the last record and in a way, and you're reviewing the idea of the band rather than the specific record you're listening to, or you're trying to say something favourable because you think it might help you get an interview in the issue after. So I don't know. I mean, it was a very unreliable business, I think, the record reviewing world. And it's so much easier also to slag things off. On the NME, the singles column was just really just kind of clay pigeon shooting, wasn't it? It was just taking pot shots and things, because it was just a really simple way of being kind of funny. It's much harder to be funny and be kind at the same time.
There's a nice review for Eddie Grant's album Can't Get Enough, again by Robin Katz, as we mentioned earlier, gets 9 out of 10. It says a steamy collection of 9 pulsating funk, reggae and disco tracks. And I was kind of curious about Eddie Grant because he was obviously quite a big name in the 80s and I didn't really know an awful lot about him, and I had a quick look on Wikipedia and just had an absolutely incredible career. He formed the Equals in 1965. They had a number 1 in 1968 with Baby Come Back. 6 top 40 singles altogether. Then he had a heart attack and a collapsed lung in 1971.
That's right, they're really interesting, yeah. And then came back with Electric Avenue, all those huge hits.
Yeah, then moved into production and set up his own record label, Ice Records. And then it says on his Wikipedia page, he started branching out of music and learnt how to tap dance and tried his hand at acting.
Brilliant.
And then in the 80s, he had another 5 top 40 hit singles, including number 1, obviously with I Don't Want to Dance. Yeah. And then I was unaware of this as well. Apparently he invented a genre of music called ring bang in 1994, which was, I think if I remember it correctly, it was something about kind of fusing all kinds of African music from different African countries into like a continent-wide musical style. And then it organised a festival in Tobago in 2000 for ring bang music. But, a really fascinating character that you don't really kind of hear about anymore, Eddie Grant, but quite an interesting career he's had. Moving on to the next lyric page, we've got Kate Robbins, More Than In Love, and next to Kate Robbins, probably the only time in their life they've ever been side by side, Michael Jackson, your good friend, Mark. I believe you were basically his best friend for a while, weren't you?
Yes, I was. Well, I managed to interview him, which is amazing. It was only a phone interview, but quite something at the time, really, because it was when Thriller came out, before Thriller came out, and hard to imagine, but people thought he was obviously off the wall of being a huge hit. But I mean, no one had any idea what was about to come. And we got a copy of Thriller in the office and played it. Thought it was pretty good. And I stuck my hand up and said I'd be prepared to wait till 11 o'clock in the evening for him to ring from Los Angeles. I sat there in the office, drinking cans of beer and playing records. And eventually the phone rang, and it was Michael Jackson, or Michael Jackson's PR. And they were. He was really extraordinary because half of him was this kind of childlike, awed kind of voice talking about the magic of E.T. and Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol and all that, and children's stories. And the other half was this incredibly kind of adult, switched on, brilliant kind of record executive brain talking about, the records that he's a kind of A&R mentality about the records he decided to cover for the tracks he'd covered for his album. So it was a weird combination of being completely switched on about music and then partly an act, clearly, this whole kind of, this mystified child. His great phone friend at the time was Adam Ant. and he and Adam Ant, he was talking about ringing up Adam Ant and how they would sit and talk about records and clothes and stuff. But it was very odd. But the other interesting thing was that we didn't really know very much about, what was going on in his life at the time with the kind of, Neverland and all that. And him talking about this place with the monkeys and the llamas was really riveting, the playground rides. And eventually I said, well, look, walk me through the house. Just tell me, let's go down the corridor and tell me, what you come to. He says, well, if you go down that corridor there and turn right, you get to the cinema. And he had a private cinema, a 35-seater cinema, and he'd invite people over and they'd watch E.T., And, you had fairground rides. You had a complete kind of, like a kind of mini Disneyland, which we all got to know about later on. But actually in 1982, whatever it was, whenever I did that interview, that was all news, and he was extraordinary. It was fantastic to have got to talk to him. And that was pretty much the last interview he did. He did one with the Daily Mirror, with somebody on the Daily Mirror, and then he never did another pop interview ever again.
In your excellent book, Rockstars Stole My Life, available at all good bookshops.
Oh, right.
You talk about almost becoming a Michael Jackson expert on the media, when he died, and suddenly you were being called by all kinds of news programmes, and that must have been quite a strange few hours for you.
Well, it's very odd in that, when there's a big news story like that, you've got to get someone to stand it up, and the radio is desperate to get anybody at all who has any association that they can pass off as some kind of expertise or inside knowledge. And I happened to be, I went in and did, I suppose it would have been the Today programme. That's right, when he died. And because I was in the building, every single other programme had queued up outside. And I was just taken to Radio 1, then Radio 2, and then World Service, and then whatever it was. Just did the rounds until Paul Gambaccini turned up. I remember just being told, actually, mate, you can go home. Gambo's in the building. And Gambo took over, quacking on about his great experience with the Jacksons, which was infinitely greater than mine. But it was rather weird because I was presented as being, not just someone who knew a bit about him, but eventually as being billed as being his personal friend. And I have to say, look, I'm not his personal friend. I once had a telephone conversation with him, but that's more than most other people have. So that made me quite valuable for the day.
Usurped by Gambo. That sounds like a full B-side, doesn't it?
It is. It really is, yeah.
OK, flipping the page over, we've got a half-page black and white advert for a new single by the Eurythmics. I guess this is before they'd had a hit. Because
that's a very arty thing. That's Annie Lennox looking very strange with kind of white face paint. And
yeah, she's doing them eyes, isn't she?
Doing weird eyes. And... but it's interesting that they really believe they would have hits or they would be buying adverts to smash hits.
Yeah.
And one of the things they tell you about this record, it's produced by Connie Plank. That means absolutely nothing to a smash hits reader. Nothing at all.
No, well, that was what really surprised me about this. This is why I just wanted to briefly mention it, because I'd always associated him with Can and Neu and Kraftwerk and so on. But he actually produced so much stuff. I had a look on his Wikipedia page, and he'd also worked with the Scorpions, Clannad, Flock of Seagulls, Killing Joke, and the Tourists. So I guess that's why he had that link with Eurythmics. And interesting, because we mentioned U2 before as well, and there was another little thing on his Wikipedia page that really made me chuckle. It said, according to a radio documentary about Plank's life, it was Brian Eno's idea that Plank should produce U2's Joshua Tree album instead of him. After being introduced to the band by Eno and having a short meeting, Plank turned down the job, saying, "I cannot work with this singer." After this episode, Plank then asked for more time to reconsider. In the meantime, he attended a U2 concert where Bono introduced Plank to the audience as their new producer, after which Connie Plank is said to have left the concert and never communicated further with any member of U2.
That's brilliant.
So that was that.
So about taking your bat home. Absolutely. That'll learn them. So the independent bits, that's amazing, isn't it? See, I think those things were really important parts of Smash Hits. This is by Ian Birch. And, again, it's the old melody maker. It's the old Our Past Lives were kind of revisited by writing things like that. But, I think it's really interesting. He writes about Pig Bag and Joy Division and, isn't it, Red Crayola and Dead Kennedys and, fair enough, these records are interesting and the more adventurous people at the top end of the readership might go out and buy them, top end age-wise.
It was acting as that bridge to what you go to after pop music, just as you'd move through
Completely.
the schedule on Radio 1, from the daytime pop stuff into a little more alternative in the evening and onto John Peel, and that's kind of what this is like.
Yeah, this is John Peel and hearing Papa's got a brand new pig bag or whatever, and you'd think, okay, this is more my kind of thing, and the Au Pairs. But then again, Adam and the Ants and the Human League, they were kind of esoteric fringe groups that actually moved into the mainstream. So you could have said the same thing could have happened to any one of this lot, actually.
Yeah, some of those Adam Ants records are still in the early Adam Ants stuff on Do It is in the singles and the albums chart.
Yeah, that's right. And Ian's writing about Kevin Armstrong here from his London-based band Local Heroes. Kevin Armstrong went on to be the musical director of David Bowie at Live Aid. He was the one who ran the group with Tom Dolby in it and Matthew Seligman and all those guys.
Yeah. And a member of Tin Machine.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
So it's a big part of it. It's really great that Smash Hits did stuff like that. It was really really adventurous and interesting.
Yeah, very broad church.
It is. There we are. Smash Hits writing about a certain ratio. Brilliant.
And talking of the broad church, we then move on to a couple of pages on Squeeze, Square Deal Squeeze. Interview by Dave Hepworth with Glenn and Chris, and really looking at the qualities that Squeeze have. And I think summing up this interview, it's really about substance over style. Again, they use Adamant as a tool of comparison, and they talk about, I was mentioning before about kind of image and gimmicks compared to more kind of serious pop. And Dave Hepworth writes, even the most cursory squint at TOTP these days rams home a simple message. If you want to get ahead, get yourself an image. Slip on those crazy clothes. Appoint yourself the leader of a tribe. I think he's definitely talking about Adamant there. Make those folks at home sit up. Make them spill their tea. Squeeze, on the other hand, make the average stagehand look striking. When I inquire whether there was ever a time when they completely lost faith in the band's commercial prospects, the matter of visuals obviously comes up. And they talk about the kind of the craft of their songwriting and how, they don't slag off Adam, Ant or Sting, but they say that they've got a very different approach and they think their chances of staying around longer are a lot better. What were your views on Squeeze?
Oh, I love Squeeze, but they were one of those groups that were just left looking exposed when the video boom took off. Because, Squeeze were just kind of five kind of regular, not very prepossessing blokes writing these fantastic songs. And suddenly it became all about image. It became all about the way you looked, and it became all the way you sold yourself, not by slogging around the tour circuit anymore. You had to produce videos. And they never looked comfortable at all in any videos. They couldn't act. They looked self-conscious. There wasn't an obviously supremely glamorous member of the group. There's a picture of them with this feature where they, Glenn's got a clarinet and, the bass player guy, whose name I've now forgotten, has got a trumpet, and they're all trying to make all clutching, interesting instruments, trying to make themselves look, colourful and fascinating and eccentric. And Chris Difford's wearing a flat cap and all that. You just thought they look agonised by it.
It's not flying, that, is it? I think the ratio of pop kids putting Adamant or Human League on the wall compared to cutting out that picture of Squeeze was probably 1,000 to 1. It was not many were going to be sticking that up with a bit of blue tack, were they?
No, but also what percentage of the people who bought their records were Smash Hits readers? With Duran Duran, a vast percentage of the people who bought those records read Smash Hits and were teenagers. But with Squeeze, there would be some, but a lot of those Squeeze records just bought by, I don't know, just the general public, weren't they? Just everybody.
Yeah.
They had mass appeal,
Yeah, well, Dave highlights some of the lyrics like "You left my ring by the soap," and that's it's a very kind of adult lyric, isn't it? Their songs were often about proper adult relationships and when things go a bit wrong.
Things going wrong too, completely. No, there's nothing terribly optimistic about Squeeze songs. They're all about naughty goings on summer holidays, remembered from the past, or the disasters of modern married life, or whatever, on relationships going wrong.
Hard to relate to as an 11-year-old Adamant fan.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. but we covered them quite a lot and things like Smash Hits. We thought we loved them. Thought they were really interesting and funny and characterful. They had interesting things to say. It was much easier, actually, talking about Squeeze, much easier to cover groups that you didn't particularly like, because you had to look at them really hard and think, what is appealing for a 12, 13, 14-year-old about this band, and how can we represent that? Whereas someone like Squeeze just thought, well, everyone loves Squeeze, they're great records, but then you're stuck with this, how can we get people involved, you know? Apart from the fact they say quite characterful things.
Turning a few pages on it, Mark, I think you said you'd like to maybe speak a little bit about the gear and the T-shirts and that kind of thing that's on the next few pages.
Oh, well, I thought they were an important part of it, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, bondage jackets, 12 quid. PVC straights, 7.90. Clash jeans, motorbike jackets. I mean, I don't know. Then, the way you expressed your affection for a group, here we are, look, giant patches for £1. Toya, Killing Joke.
Rod Stewart.
I wonder how many of those they sold. Christ. It's been very hard predicting how many to get printed up, mustn't it? You know, how many Devo patches should we manufacture? I've got no idea. We don't want to be left with a warehouse full of them, you know.
12,000.
12,000, I know. But, no, I just thought that was a really interesting part of the whole mix of the world at the time, is that, you know, if you liked a group, you know, you could go out and buy the T-shirt and buy all the merch and walking around advertising the fact that you liked them, and that was the tribe you were in, where it was a really important part of the whole equation, really. And I don't know if that's quite so much now. I don't know. I mean, when people go to big arenas to see an act, they probably wear the kind of thing that act would be wearing themselves. But I don't know if that whole tribal thing of the T-shirts still exists to the same extent. Not sure.
No, I don't think so.
No.
T-shirts and badges. We've done some issues of we've done some issues of Smash Hits before, where there was a badge top 10 as well, wasn't there?
Oh, right.
Yeah, badge top 10.
It was it was a big part of it.
Although I do like in the midst of all the, you know, Clash gear and giant patches and things like that, there's an advert for Angling Times in there with 2 free floats.
Well, that's an EMAP thing as a whole.
Yeah.
Rod Sopp, when not eating a rare steak, would have said a little quarter page has come up here and stuck that in as a freebie. But I know, ridiculous.
And then we get to the letters page.
Oh, yeah.
And, well, lots going on here, as ever. I mean, you mentioned that you used to get sacks and sacks of mail into the magazine. I mean, whose job was it to kind of go through these and pick out, you know, what was going to be in the mag?
Well, I think one of the guys, I think Sam or Bev used to just open them all up and give them a cursory read. But otherwise, you just got presented with, I mean, I edited the letters column for quite a long time, actually, because I'd invented the concept of the black type, and which was, you know, which really took off. Actually, it was brilliant. I just invented this idea that the black type was something that came out at night and answered the letters, and its mother was a visual display unit, and its father was a bottle of Tipex, and it called itself the black type, and it suddenly took off, and everyone started writing to the black type, and we had to invent black type T-shirts, and Tom Hibbert took it over from me and made it even more psychedelic and extraordinary. It was really good fun. But no, it was a big part of the magazine. And can you imagine, anybody who ever got a letter printed in Smash Hits was so thrilled and so grateful, and would still have a copy of it to this day. You know, it would have meant so much. And I think it's so interesting how the difference of tone between the boys writing and the girls. There's a girl writing in here. Girls often wrote in just about personalities, really. And blokes wrote in about issues. Even at the age of 14, there's a girl writing here called Janice Hudson. And she says, "Dear Carol Klein, nobody cares whether Hazel O'Connor is fat or not, but suggesting that Ian Gillan is fat is outrageous. Ian Gillan is the best-looking person on this earth, and his body is fantastic. There is no one half so lovely as this underrated genius, and now you know." Janice Hudson. And there's a bloke here who says... he's a guy called Jim Turner from Sidcup in Kent, and his letter says, "Bob Marley died on the 11th of May, and unlike John Lennon and Elvis Presley, he received little mention from our national press. I can only hope from this reaction that Bob will not be commercialised and that his memory will not be exploited by the record companies owning the rights to anything he sang, played or wrote. Rest in peace, Bob." And you're thinking, dream on, Jim Turner. But anyway, well, that's a real different. If that isn't too grossly crass and sexist a generalisation, girls who infinitely more interesting letters wrote about personalities, really, and about the characters and the idiosyncrasies of pop stars, and blokes often just wrote about issues and things and movements.
And why don't you have more metal music in the magazine?
Yeah, why isn't there more metal? Yeah. Exactly. And how whoever it was who reviewed the singles last week who didn't like my favourite group should be taken out and shot. Because that's the other thing, is that at this age you can't deal with the criticism of bands you like. You think that's kind of wrong. You know, you believe that this group is absolutely, completely lovable, and you can't contain and deal with the idea that anyone's got something negative to say about them. It just seems to be it's factually correct that they're great, you know. So it's a very lively age to be writing letters.
There's some stuff in here about futurism, and again, I think this is something because we recently did the issue before this with Kim Wilde and Stray Cats, and we were talking there about how New Romanticism, or New Romantics, wasn't called that then, but there's stuff in here about being a futurist band, and that gets mentioned again on the second page of the letters. Someone called Sarah Merson from Bath says, "Can someone please tell me what a futurist group actually is? With the exception of perhaps Visage, I think, though I'm probably wrong about them too, I don't know of any. If you read the interviews with all the other groups, they're at pains to point out that they don't want to be classed as just another bandwagon jumping futurist group and are just doing their own thing. People talk as if futurist bands are in abundance, but I'm beginning to believe that there aren't any."
Futurist is a great word, because it became a really big thing, that because being a the best example of a futurist is Gary Newman, and part of the reason Gary Newman was popular was not just that he made these fantastic records, they really have endured, but that Gary Newman was this kind of alienated, misunderstood, sort of rejected soul, this sort of tortured, fragile, too frail for the modern world, you know. And I think a lot of young teenagers, you kind of felt the same way, that they were at that stage where they weren't getting on with their parents and their brothers and sisters, and they were, you know what I mean, and you're stuck in your bedroom alone, feeling alienated and removed, and you kind of identified with the futurist bands, you know. So I don't know. It became a big issue that the people who liked it absolutely loved that music, and the people who didn't thought it was ludicrous and pretentious and should be given a vigorous shoeing.
You mentioned Tom Hibbett before. You was talking about him sort of taking over Black Type at a later date. If you sort of sum up Tom's legacy in terms of smash hits, what did he bring to the magazine, do you think?
Well, he was terribly funny. You know, in real life, he didn't like very much pop music at all. You know, I lived with him for quite a long time before we got married, and he liked the Kinks, and he liked he liked Iggy Pop, and he liked Julian Cope, and he liked Rocky Erickson, and about 3 or 4 other things, and that was about it. And the rest of the time, he just took the piss out of the group. So it was perfect for him being on smash hits, because he didn't really like anything. And all he was doing was looking for the way that he could send them all up and make them into cartoon characters. And I think he did that brilliantly. You know, Morrissey was this kind of foppish clown waving gladioli around. Kraftwerk were these sort of absurd robotic androids. Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran were these kind of daft-looking characters in blouses and tea towels, and pixie boots, and with big hair. And I mean, he's really good at sending people up, and also very, very funny, and just inventing this kind of fantasy world. He would sort of he used to do the trails for Smash Hits. As after I left, we didn't really overlap. I got him in there, but I'd gone by then as well, Q&Q. And he would say, the next issue would be, would always feature groups like the Flying Savaloy Brothers and Janet, or the Human Saucepans of the Orinoco, plus Duran Duran and Nick Kershaw. So he just made up this kind of fantasy nonsense. But it's brilliant. He had a brilliant technique for interviewing people, where he wouldn't really ask any questions. He would just sit there looking disapproving. And to fill the silence, people would just start coming up with all sorts of ridiculous stuff, because they were just embarrassed that they weren't being asked anything, really. So he got great confessions out of people. Neil Tennant told me that soon after he left Smash Hits and had a hit single, he was interviewed by Tommy for Smash Hits after West End Girls, I think. And he just thought, this is going to be such fun. Here I am, I've had a #1 record, everything I've ever wanted in life I've achieved. And he sat down with Tom, and Tom just sat there with his tape recorder rolling and said, so, Neil, number one. I mean, what's next? That kind of, and kind of shrugging as if somehow his achievement was kind of, was somehow rather mediocre. Neil was kind of panicked by this and sort of, went into this extraordinary interview where he, was just talking about having doubts about it all. And maybe he should be giving the money to charity or whatever. And I don't know. It's just, it's really, really interesting. But he was great, Tom. Really funny, really characterful, and he was a big part of it.
I think that thing about not taking music too seriously is, what makes Smash It so great, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, you talked earlier on about the dividing line between NME and Smash Hits, and that's really a big part of it, that Smash Hits would send everyone up. It wasn't they weren't mean and cruel, particularly, but they just gloried in the fun of it all and the
ridiculousness of it all.
Yeah, and it was affectionate too, actually. I mean, it really
absolutely
was. It was completely affectionate. It didn't mean any harm, but they just thought that, and even it's like Private Eye, actually. Private Eye is very similar. In Private Eye, even the people they approve of, they take the piss out of. Fair enough. That's their job. They don't just take the piss out of the politicians that they didn't vote for. They take the piss out of absolutely everybody. That's their job. And just a way of making people get involved. If you presented Morrissey, if you condensed him into this clownish figure with his gladioli and his hearing aid and his daft dancing and his shirt, slashed open to the waist, you sort of had a visual image of who this guy was, and you could kind of, he became a kind of a character that everyone could get a handle on, really.
I think it's some of that humour as well. Obviously you started Q magazine, and some of that was carried on through Q as well, wasn't it?
Yes, I suppose it was really. It's the same sort of thing. Q's attitude was quite similar, actually, which is it took the piss out of absolutely everybody. All the people we loved and all the people we hated. And again, fond, affectionate, harmless. Just an entertaining way of getting everybody. I mean, often a really good issue of Q, I think, that even if you didn't like the groups, like Smash Hits, even if you didn't like any of the groups they covered, the thing was sufficiently entertaining in itself for you want to buy it every issue. It wasn't to do with who they covered; it was the way they covered them. That was what was interesting.
And so we move on from the letters. We get the gigs, a couple more lyrics, and then on the back, the Human League, in colour. With the famous lineup of the Human League, Phil and the girls posing outside some industrial wasteland, basically.
Only 10 minutes walk from where we're currently recording this.
That's right.
So.
Yeah, it's just around the corner for you, isn't it, in Sheffield? Yeah.
It is, yeah. Just up the road in Sheffield here.
What a great lineup! That was a particularly fantastic story, the Human League story. I mean, I think he really did see them dancing in a club. I think that's a true story. And the idea that Phil Oakey, when the other two members of the group had left and looked like they were going to be the ones that had all the success, and that happened to so many bands, happened to Depeche Mode, how do you react when what could have been the real stars and the real engine room of the group have left? And he sees these two girls who effectively can't dance. They just somehow represented the readership. Every girl looked at that group on Top of the Pops and thought, that could be me. There was nothing beyond the realms of their imagination, was there? You weren't dazzled by the choreography. You just thought, wow, somebody like me has got up on stages and is a pop group. It's fantastic. And they're still going. The league still exists, don't they? Phil and the two girls are still the band, which is fantastic, I think. Wonderful. Great poster.
Yeah, it is.
Properly good group.
I'm just thinking it's almost a parallel story with Adam and the Ants, isn't it?
It is, well, yeah.
The thing about being kind of in a very different musical place, but then becoming totally embraced by the mainstream and perhaps leaving your old audience behind a little bit.
Yeah, but having the nerve to go out there and chase the pop market and having all that success. They were brilliant. They made great records, incredible records.
So we've come to the end of the magazine. But before we say goodbye, looking back at your time at Smash Hits, I know you said it's a long time ago, and this magazine was kind of from your early days working on the mag, and you went on to edit it. But what are the standout moments for you working on the mag? When you think of Smash Hits, what do you think of?
Well, I think of just the the team on the inside, really. What a hoot it was. I mean, it was just such fun. As I said before, it was so liberating because we'd all worked on those, the music press. I mean, the Melody Maker and the NME on the outside, it probably would look like a really glamorous place to be. It wasn't, actually. It was very competitive and quite a difficult atmosphere. And being in a world entirely populated by mostly male rock critics is quite hard and quite judgmental. And you were constantly agonised by whether or not your taste was right. Is it okay to like so-and-so, And I think we were all just giddy with the fun of being at Smash Hits. It was fantastic. Let's say you just sit there and think, right, so what have we got this fortnight? We've got Hazel Dean. How are we going to cover her? Toya, fantastic. Just trying to think of just ways to cover these people for an audience that was so optimistic and enthusiastic and that it meant so much to them. And, I thought it was great. In terms of actual moments, I don't know. I mean, the Michael Jackson interview was fun. I didn't do much. I mean, I regret now that I didn't do more of those. I remember sending Peter Martin off to go interview Wham in China. Why I didn't do that myself, I've got absolutely no idea. I went on the road with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. That was pretty good fun. I went to the San Remo Pop Festival on a plane. That's a Smash Hits memory for you. On a plane with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. We had Frankie, all of Spandau Ballet, all of Duran Duran, Sade, Chaka Khan, Bronski Beat, and Talk. And I think somebody else as well, all on the same aircraft. I remember thinking, if this old barge goes down, then A, what's the insurance? And B, what will the Cocteau twins will probably have a hit next week because the whole thing will be cleared out. But that was fun. That was a very 80s moment. No, they were very exciting and really good times. I really enjoyed all of it. Nothing but the fondest memories.
Yeah. Well, what about taking Bananarama out on the town?
Oh, yeah, Bananarama. My God. I took him out on a photo shoot. We got a Lady Di and Charles lookalike. We photographed them at Buckingham Palace. We took them to they wanted to go to the new burger restaurant on Oxford Street and all had 3/4 pound burgers. Then lay around feeling unwell, thinking they'd eaten too much. I took them up the fire monument. What else did we do? We took them to the sanctuary in Covent Garden, and they had a kind of I don't know. They went swimming or whatever. And it was very good fun. They were great. They were a hoot. They were brilliant.
Yeah, and I think there's also one cover of Smash Hits that we possibly need to at least mention, and that was one that, well, it came about because somebody wrote into a TV programme.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, Lord, I forgot all about that. Yeah, no, we had this idea. Was it my idea? Did they come to us? I can't remember. But Jim Will Fix It was the huge programme at the time. I mean, really was massive. It had an audience of, I think, 19 million, maybe 20 million. And they wanted to fix it. Someone had written in and said, could you fix it for us to be with a pop star on the cover of Smash Hits? And I thought, I cannot pass this opportunity up. That is fantastic publicity. And, of course, I couldn't get a pop star to do it. They didn't want to do it. So it had to be somebody who was desperate for the publicity. And the only person I could get to was Marilyn, who was, you remember Marilyn, who was a friend of Boy George's, sort of androgynous, strange creature. And it turned out to be a nightmare, which is just too long a story to tell. But it was just awful. The girl came down, the girl who won the competition, who was quite tricky in herself, and demanded £50 cash in spending money when we met her at King's Cross, and got to the studio. And and I can remember she was preceded by two girls who dressed up in who wanted to dress up in Victorian policewoman costumes. Uniforms rather. Then by a 14-year-old boy who was learning French and wanted to go to France and try out his French, ordering a French meal in a restaurant in Normandy with his parents. All this sort of stuff about people wanting to join the Sea Cadets or whatever. And then we had me being interviewed with this girl and with Marilyn by Jimmy Savile. And Jimmy Savile was a weird character. Oh, my Lord, he was weird.
Really?
I can remember standing there watching in the backstage, watching it on the monitors when he came on with the French owner of the restaurant that was going to feature in the thing before us. And this guy saying, "Qu'est-ce que c'est? C'est incroyable!" this awful man in his kind of yellow pastel tracksuit with his ridiculous cigar, and his chair where he pressed a button and a teapot came out of one arm and an ashtray with a lit cigar on the other. And he was ludicrous, really. And he called me Mr. Smash Hits. Now then, as it happens, on this day, on this lovely day, with this lovely girl and this lovely man, did you or did you not have the most fantastic time of your life with this pop star? You know, every question he asked could only be answered yes or no. Is the worst interviewer. It's the idea that he would completely dominate the whole thing. But anyway, we eventually got the picture and we eventually put them on the cover. And actually, it was quite a big seller. But Marilyn was the nightmare. And, you know, I've spent more time with that we used to have a tape of that. And we used to get it out when people came over for years, up until the point where Jimmy Savile was disgraced. And people would say after dinner and say, well, okay, any entertainment? People would say, can we watch the Jimmy Savile tape? My kids loved it. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Now then, Mr. Smash Hits, that was called Mr. Smash, I couldn't remember my name. Mr. Smash Hits, what, you know, on this lovely day with these lovely people. Now then, how'd you feel? Oh, it was dreadful. But anyway, yeah, happy memories.
Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to check out our website. It's giddypoppod.home.blog, where you'll find the links to the issue of Smash Hits that we've been looking at, along with those Spotify and YouTube playlists, so you can enjoy your ride on the carousel to its fullest. And of course, you can check out our previous episodes, playlists and scans at our back issues, if you will.
And if you want to support us by buying us a coffee, we would be forever in your debt. It's coffee.com/giddypoppod. is where you can go to do that. That's ko-fi.com/giddypoppod. And come and say hello to us at giddypoppod on Twitter, Facebook, and of course Instagram. And we'll say hello back. I should also mention while we're here that we recently were featured briefly on another fantastic podcast. There's a great comedy podcast that comes out of Australia called Sizzletown. And our episode with Richard Drew that was originally out sometime last year, wasn't it?
No, it was this year.
Was it?
It was this year.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But it was an issue, the issue with OMD on the front from 1983.
And there's a feature on Sizzletown called Pod Farts, where Tony, the host, scrolls through various podcasts and just, if there's an unidentified possible trouser burp noise, he'll feature it. And yeah, we got featured on that, didn't we? It was an honour and a privilege.
Yeah.
I think we've ascertained 99% with Richard that it was a squeaky chair. He says it was.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, it was a squeaky chair. And I did go back to the original audio just to check that it hadn't been tampered with just for comic effect.
Yeah, so
but no, that the noise is genuinely there, and I think we it gets used to good effect.
Absolutely. But we can categorically state there were no wind-breaking moments on that show.
No,
not that we're aware of.
Not that we're aware of.
It's time once again for Pod Farts. This is the segment where we provide examples of people flagrantly breaking wind during their own podcast. And I have a great example here from one of my favourite podcasts out of the UK, the Giddy Carousel of Pop. Now, this is a show where two very well-spoken English gents, Simon Galloway and Gavin Hogg, go through an old issue of Smash Hits magazine from the 80s, one page at a time. And it's fascinating and hilarious stuff if you're old enough to recall that era. But this is from a recent episode, a segment where they were discussing the band Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and they were talking about Semaphore. And their guest, who I think is on Zoom, Mr. Richard Drew, chimes in. Listen closely.
If there's anyone else out there that's more of an expert in Semaphore than I am.
I used to do it. Do Semaphore. Well, I can only go so far. I was a Sea Cadet back in the late 70s.
There it was. And that is not been doctored by us. Now, Matt thinks it could be a chair squeak. So can we just play the last bit again, Matt?
I was a Sea Cadet back in the late 70s.
No, I'm calling it, Matt. That is definitely a candidate for Pod Farts.
And just very quickly, I just wanted to mention Mark's wonderful book, Rockstars Stole My Life. But there's lots more in there about smash hits as well as his life before smash hits and after. And it's really fascinating look through the whole kind of kaleidoscope of pop, really, going through the decades. So do go and read that if you have never read it. Very highly recommended by both of us.
Yeah, well, judging by the fact that we've both got copies here to hand.
Exactly. You know, where Mark's talking about the Michael Jackson interview and then what happened when Michael Jackson died, that's in there in a lot of detail, and there's stuff in there as well about the San Remo plane trip that he mentions as well with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So, yeah, very, very highly recommended. And also, as well, it would be wrong of us not to say thank you to Marco Pirroni for very generously giving us quite a big chunk of time. We may have a little bit more from him at a later date.
Oh, yeah. I think, keep your eyes peeled for a little bonus episode of the Giddy Carousel of Pop, where you'll get to hear more of our chat with Marco, because, it's too good not to share.
Oh, that was pure gold as well, wasn't it? Yeah, so thank you very much, Marco, for giving up your time so generously.
Yeah, and thanks once again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Giddy Carousel of Pop. Bye!